are we? Okay, so today's daf is Nun Daled. We are on the top of Nun Daled, second line. Well, really the first line of Nun Daled Amud Aleph. It says Harachilim Yotzot Kevulot. So the question is, what is Kevulot? It says that sheep, female sheep, ewes, they are called, okay, can go out Kevulot, but the only problem is we don't know what that means, so it doesn't help us. Okay, so my Kevulot, what does Kevulot mean? Shemechabelin Aliyah shelahen lemata. Kedei shelo ya'alu alehen hazecharim. What it means is that they would tie down their tails in the downward position so that the males would not mount them when they wanted to prevent them from reproducing, okay? For whatever reason, we don't know why, at different times.
Well, actually, they do say here, so I didn't know that. I forgot what it was. They did say it here.
There were times that they know. It was brought up. It was brought up yesterday as a proof for something else. Yes. So, but now it's actually explaining. So, my mashmadai kavul lishada vela avid perehu. So, how do we know that kavul means something which doesn't reproduce? How do we know that? Because Dichtiv says Mahi Arima Elle Asher Natat Liyachi Vayikra, and what is the actual pasuk supposed to say? Vayikra Lahem. And he said and he called them Eretz Kavul Ladayam Hazeh. This is talking about the times of Shlomo HaMelech. So during the time of Shlomo HaMelech, Hiram, the king of Tzur, helped him a great deal with constructing the Beit HaMikdash. Particularly, he helped him with wood, and he brought him some workers. He was very helpful. They had a great treaty, a great relationship with one another. And in order to thank him for all the help that he gave, Shlomo gave him a bunch of cities. But apparently he gave him cities which were like not very valuable. So he said to them, "What are these things that you gave me?" My brother. He calls them my brother. So they didn't, they weren't. He didn't hold it against him, but he said to him, what is this? Yeah, what kind of present is this? So that's why he called it Eretz Kavul. So obviously that means something bad. So the implication, I guess the simple meaning would be, Kavul means that they don't produce anything. But the Gemara doesn't jump to that answer at first. So by Eretz Kavul, what does it mean, Eretz Kavul? Amar Rav Huna Shayuba Bnei Adam Shemechuvalin B'Kesef U'Vazahav. It means that they had people who were wrapped in gold and silver. They had silver and lots of money. So the Gemara asks, wait a second. Amar le Rava Ichachi Hainu Dichtiv. If this is true, that the people had so much money, so wait a second. Is this what it means when it says that it wasn't a good place? Because it says Velo Yashiru Be'enav. Because they had so much money, he wasn't happy? Why wasn't Hiram happy? He should be happy as a wealthy, he gave him a wealthy district. So he should be happy about that. So the answer is, he said, yes, even though the rich didn't like it. The problem is when you have rich people, they don't do any work. So that's the problem. So true, having wealthy people might seem like a positive, but if what you're looking for is to produce off the land, agriculturally, having wealthy people is not going to help you, because they're not going to want to do that. They're going to want to sit back and relax. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, Eretz Chomton Haita. It was a very sandy place. Why was it called Eretz Kavul? The mistarga bakara ad kavla, because when you would put your foot into it, it would go up to the knee. Kavla. Okay? So that means your foot would sink in up to your knee. So he's saying it was a sandy land, which means to say that it wasn't good for agriculture. So they're trying to determine why wasn't it good for agriculture. Was it because the people were of a high class and they're not going to work? Was it because the land, the earth itself was sandy and therefore didn't lend itself to planting? Or ara mechavla. And there are people who say that it's a saying. It was a saying in common parlance that they would say it's a place that's kavla, which means that it doesn't produce fruit. So there are three different ways that this word Eretz Kavul can mean a place that's not useful. Either because it refers to the people being luxurious type people, high class people, or it refers to the nature of the earth itself, that it was sandy and therefore not lending itself to planting, or it was referring to the fact that the earth did not have the nutrients or whatever was necessary to produce a lot of crop.
Non-productive.
Yeah, unproductive. Yeah.
Which we can relate to today.
So whatever the word kavul means, somehow the word kavul is a reference to its lack of productivity. Exactly how the term, what the Gemara is doing here is not questioning what the problem was. Everybody knows that Eretz Kavul, when Hiram complained to Shlomo that this is Eretz Kavul, he meant this is an unproductive place. The question is, how does the word kavul mean unproductive? Is it referring to the people? Is it referring to the quality of the sandiness? Or is it simply a word that means Eretz Ara Mechavla, that it's a place that doesn't produce any fruit. So, but in any case, what it definitely means in our context is something that they would do to the sheep to make sure that it wouldn't reproduce. And you're allowed to let the sheep go out wearing that kind of protection. Now we have kivunot. What are kivunot? We said that kivunot was okay, right? So my kivunot, shemechabenin oto lemelat. What they would do was they would cover the sheep with a special kind of sweater to protect its fine wool. They didn't want it to get ruined. So if a sheep had, when it was young, had very fine wool, they didn't want it to get dirty, to get exposed to the elements, so they would cover it to keep it pure. Kedetnan, as it says in the Mishnah, Se'et katzemer lavan. When it talks about tzara'at, the different types of skin discoloration that would make you tameh, one of the colors that makes you tameh is a discoloration that's like tzemer lavan, that's like white wool. And in that discussion, Amar Rav Bevai bar Abaye said, Katzemer naki ben yomo, shemichavnin oto lemelat, when they described how white is white wool. How white is white? They said it's like the fine wool of a one-day-old sheep, shemichavnin oto, that they cover lemelat, for the finest cloth, okay, for the finest product. So you see that there's a concept. Mechavnin means protecting this wool. So kivunot means the sheep that go around with this special sweater that's protecting their wool to keep it white. They're allowed to go out with that on Shabbat. That type of a cover. Because you might think that it's an extraneous, it's an extra unnecessary item. It's like a burden serving the owner.
It's serving the owner, not the animal.
Right, you might think that. Right. The doggy sweater is definitely serving the animal. Yeah, for sure. It said, we said that the goats can go out with their udders tied so that the milk doesn't leak. So Itmar was stated, Rav says, Halacha Rabbi Yehuda, that the law follows Rabbi Yehuda. What was Rabbi Yehuda's position? There were three opinions. The first opinion was that they can go out with their udders tied no matter what. Then you had Rabbi Yosei that said, they can never go out with their udders tied. And then there was the middle position. Rabbi Yehuda came along and said, no. It depends. If the purpose is to save the milk and it's really serving you because it's collecting milk and it's put on loosely so it might fall off, and then you might carry that bag with the milk in it, you can't do it. But if it's tightly affixed to the animal to stop it from producing milk, to dry up the milk, then it's allowed.
Why would you call it the same thing, though? I mean, one is
because it's still tzarurot,
and the other one is collecting.
Well, the question is, can you tie something to the udder of the animal? Tzarurot is tzarur is tied.
Oh, so in other words, both require tying something to the animal.
Right. It looks the same more or less. It's just a matter of how tight it is.
I see. Okay.
So the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda according to Rav. Ushmuel amar halacha Rabbi Yosei. Shmuel says no. The halacha follows Rabbi Yosei that you can never do it. So now the Gemara says, there were some who taught this as a separate teaching. In other words, instead of it being a comment on the Mishnah, it was just stated separately. Rav amar liyabesh mutar v'lo lechalev. Ushmuel amar echad zeh v'echad zeh asur. That it was stated independently. Rav said, if the purpose of putting this bag over the udder of the animal and tying it on is to dry the milk, it's okay. Because then it's going to be tight, it's not going to fall off. It's really like affixed to the animal. If it's to carry the milk, to catch milk, it's not okay. And Shmuel said, either way, it's not okay. There are some who taught it as follows. That it wasn't a comment on the Mishnah, but it was a comment on the Tosefta. That Rabbi Yehuda said the goats can go out with the bag over their udders if it's to dry the milk, but not to catch the milk. Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera amru kach halacha. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera said that is the halacha in theory. However, But who's going to be able to tell which one is which? You see a bag on the udder of the animal, you're not going to know what it's for. And since they're not distinguishable, we have to say they're both prohibited. Amar Shmuel v'Amrila Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, and some said that Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said Halakha Rav Yehuda ben Betera. In other words, this is the context. That Shmuel came along and said, I agree in theory with Rabbi Yehuda, but we're going like Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera and saying that since we can't really distinguish between a bag that's attached to the udder for one purpose and another purpose, we have to say they're never allowed. And Kiyata Ravin Amar Rabbi Yehuda, when Ravin came, he said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. He said that Rabbi Yochanan said, Halakha ketana kama. Rabbi Yochanan actually was even more lenient and said that the halakha follows the Tanakama, who was the most lenient, who said it's always okay, even if it's to dry the milk. Even if it's to catch the milk. But Rav seems to be the decisive one here, and he says that that even though it's true we can't distinguish. In other words, according to the first version, Shmuel and Rav are arguing about something more fundamental. Shmuel was saying that the halacha actually is that you can never is like Rabbi Yosei, that you can never put it on, and Rav was saying the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that you can if it's to dry the milk. But now at the end we're saying that really they both agree about the theoretical halacha, that it's allowed if it's to dry the milk. The only problem is, since you can't distinguish between the two, we have to be prohibitive. That was the way that the halacha came out in the end. So now the Mishnah says...
It would be allowed if it was only to, and it was clear to...
Dry the milk out. It's tightly placed.
But if you were to collect the milk, it would for sure...
not be allowed, according to this. Okay, except according to Rabbi Yochanan at the end, who was more lenient. So, but according to Rav, right. So it's unclear what the final halacha. Right. So what the final halacha is here in terms of what the bottom line is not clear. Okay. So now the Mishnah says, so now we get to what an animal cannot go out wearing. Lo yetze gamal b'mitultelet. So a camel cannot go out with a mitultelet. Now Rashi goes through. There are a number of different interpretations of what the mitultelet is. I think the simplest interpretation to take, so that we understand what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is it's similar to the saddle cover, the saddle cloth that we talked about with the donkey, except this is for a camel. And I can leave it to your vivid imagination to think of why a camel's saddle cloth is going to be treated more strictly than a donkey's, because it's harder to stay on, obviously, because it's got the bump in the middle as opposed to the donkey. So lo akud, it also cannot go out when it's akud, which means with its leg. So we're going to see what exactly this means. Velo ragul. These are different ways of tying the legs of the animal. So, and that's true with all animals. You can't tie one camel to another and lead them out tied one to the other into the street. But he can take multiple camels out for a walk by taking all of their different ropes in his hand and walking out with it. He just can't tie them to each other. We're going to see why that is. As long as he doesn't tie their leashes, so to speak, their different ropes, into one. We're going to see what all of these reasons behind all these things are in a second. So the Gemara says, Tana, it says in the Braita, or in a Tosefta, Lo yetzeh hagamal b'mitultelet takshura lo biznavo, aval yotzeu b'mitultelet takshura biznavo ubechotarto. When we said that the camel cannot go out with the saddle cloth that's tied to it, that's only if it's tied to it under its tail. But if it's tied to it under its tail and to the hump, if it's tied in two places, so we know that the saddle cloth won't fall off, then it's okay. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna said, Yotzei hagamal b'mitultel takshura lo b'shil yata, that if the saddle cloth is tied to its placenta that's sticking out. In other words, if you have an animal that's in the process of giving birth and you put a saddle and it's walking, because it has a doula, You know, the doulas, they take you for a walk. You know, the midwife, they take you for a walk to help because they don't like to do all that medical stuff. So you're taking your camel is in giving birth. So you take the camel for a walk. You want to put a nice saddle cloth on. You can tie it to the part that's protruding below. Why? Because since that part that's protruding out and is coming out, it's going to be uncomfortable for it to be moved. So therefore the animal is not going to shake off the saddle cloth. It's going to want to keep it in place. So as long as we're sure that, the point is that as long as we're sure that the saddle cloth doesn't fall off, and therefore you won't come to carry it yourself, it's okay for the camel to be carrying it on its back. So now, akud lo ragul, we have two different ways of tying the leg that are not allowed. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, akud, akedat yad v'regel ke Yitzchak ben Abraham. What does it mean you can't go akud? It means you cannot take the front leg, the foreleg, and the back leg and tie them one to the other the way that Isaac was tied by Abraham, okay? The way that we always see in the pictures, right? Bound with the foot, hand to foot, bound. Okay, you can't do that. Ragul shelo yachof yado al gabe zera'o v'ikshor. And when it says ragul, what it means you can't do, you cannot tie, you can't bend the leg of the animal and tie the bottom half. You know how they sometimes do that? They'll tie the bottom half of the leg to the top half of the leg, because they would do that so that it only has 3 easily functioning legs and it can't run away so easily. Okay? Similar to why they would tie the front leg to the back leg. If you have your front leg tied to your back leg, I mean, I don't have a back leg, but you know, an animal has a front leg tied to the back leg, it can't run away as easily.
It's hot.
Right, it's gonna hold it back. So if it gets loose, it won't get as far. So you can't go out with your animal tied like that on Shabbat. So now it says.
Sorry.
So now it says as follows. Okay, made the objection. But it says in a Braita, not like Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda said that what does it mean akudim? It means that you can't tie the front leg to the back leg. Here it says it means you can't tie the 2 front legs or the 2 back legs.
Is this Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera or?
No, that's Rav Yehuda, the Amorah. Okay. It has to be. Right? So Ragul shelo yachov yado al gabe zera'o v'ikshor. So the second thing everybody agrees, Ragul means bending one leg back and tying it to itself. But akud, everyone is arguing about. Does that mean tying the front 2 legs to each other, or does it mean tying front to back? So Rav Yehuda said it meant front to back, but we see in the Braita it means side to side. So which one is correct? So Hudamar, he was saying, Ki haitana, like a different Braita. The Tanya says in a different Braita, Kura kedat yad varegel, O shtei yadayim ushtei raglayim, Ragul sheyachov yado al gabe zera'o v'ikshor. That there's another Braita that says that akud means tying the front to the back, or tying one front to the other front, or the back to the back. Okay? So now, but the question is, but still, Bish va'akati lodami, it's still not the same, because Bish lamareisha v'seifad nicha metziata kasha. Still, that Braita is not what Rav Yehuda said, because Rav Yehuda seems to say that tying the 2 front legs or the 2 back legs is okay. It's only front to back that's not okay, according to Rav Yehuda. This Braita is saying that side to side is also not okay. And Rav Yehuda doesn't say that. Elohuda amar ki haitana. Rather, there is a third source, Tana, ki haitana, that says as follows. Akud akedat yad varegel, ki Yitzchak ben Abraham, rogol she'echov yado al gabe zera'o v'yikshor. So there is actually a source for his opinion, that the only problem is either bending one leg back on itself, or front to back. But that the 2 front legs tied to each other, or the 2 back legs tied to each other, might not be a problem. That's what Rav Yehuda is saying, and that's where he's getting it, from that source.
Sure sounds cool.
But
it sure sounds cool.
Well, it's meant to protect that.
There's another interpretation, but it involves testicles. So.
Yeah, so forget about that. Yeah.
But it works for both.
Well, yeah. I'm sure there are other methods of controlling animals from running, for sure. These are just the ones that they use. So v'lo yikshor gemalim, you're not allowed to tie one camel to the other. In other words, you have a bunch of camels, you want to take them for a walk, you can't tie one to the other and lead it out on Shabbat. What's the reason why? So what's the reason? Amar Rav Ashi, you can probably guess why. Because it looks like you're going out to sell them on Shabbat. Because why do you normally tie animals to one another when you go to the market? So people are going to say, oh look, Matthias is leading his camels to the market to sell them, and we don't want people to get the wrong impression. Aval machnis, but it says you can take the ropes from all the camels. You have 10 camels, take the ropes of all of them and walk them together. You just can't tie one to the other. Okay? So that's what Amar Rav Ashi said, Lo shanu el einyan kilayim. So what did it say you can't do? It said you can hold all the ropes in your hand, but you can't tie them together into one. So Rav Ashi says that's not a law of Shabbat. That's actually a law of kilayim, of mixtures. So what do you mean mixtures? What does it mean? So kilayim demayim. Ilema kilayim da'adam. Are you telling me that the reason why is because kilayim da'adam? What it means is like this. You are not allowed to plow, for example, with different species. You can't have like a sheep and a bull plowing together. Not that a sheep plows, but
It could.
It could. You're not allowed to use different species at the same time. So you might say, oh, what is the problem here? You're taking a bunch of camels. You just tied yourself to the camels. So now it's a man together with animals. So you're also mixing species. So maybe that's the problem. You're not allowed to, so to speak, yoke yourself, to the other animals. But that's not true, Batnan, because we learned in the Mishnah, Adam mutarim kulam lacharosh v'limshoch. He's allowed to. You're not allowed to pull other animals' species together on one, tied together and bring them together. You're not allowed to work with them together, have them pull something together. You're not allowed to do that. But you're allowed to pull something together with animals. If you want to work with the animals, you're allowed to. So that can't be the reason. Yeah. So ela kilayim dechavalim. Rather, it means mixture in the ropes. How so? But we learned that. And now, what does it mean mixtures? It means shatnez. In other words, you're not allowed to mix wool and linen together. So maybe some of the ropes are wool, some are linen, and now you're tying them over your hands. But the problem is, just wrapping it, even stitching one stitch is not enough. To make a mixture, you actually have to unite them. Wrapping it around your hand is not enough. So therefore he says, but no, le'olam kilayim dechavalim. Really, the ropes are what we're concerned about. That's what it means. As long as you don't tie them all together in a knot, because if one is linen and one is wool, so now you're making shatnez. So you have to keep them separate. You can have them all in your hand, but you have to keep them separate.
So is the law of kilayim a chok? Is that a chok, or is it that?
Well, there are reasons.
We don't want them tied together because we don't want them to mate.
Every chok has a reason. Every chok has a reason behind it.
No, I know, but I mean, is it like the reason that they're not tied together is because we don't want them to mate, or
no? It's not because they don't want them to mate.
Or is
You
it
can wear
just
a linen tie and a wool
right? So it's a
Yeah.
chok. In other words, let's say,
But you can't put them together.
Wool sweater,
Can't combine them, right?
But they have to be wrapped around and doubled.
It has to be doubled and tied. That's what he's talking about here. It has to be united into one entity. It can't just be that they're touching each other, right? So in the case of animals, you have to unite them in some way by having them all together. Now the reason, there are different interpretations. Like the Ramban says that the reason is you have to look at the species God created in the world as distinct. And when we reduce them all to one, we just say, oh, they're all livestock. What's the difference? Bull, sheep, camel. It's all the same. For my purpose, I just want to see my field plowed. I don't care what these are just machines.
Everyone has an identity.
They're just machines, right? So it's like, so saying each species has an identity. We don't want to mix blur the God created distinctions for a reason. Lemineho, it says in Bereshit always. Each one is to its kind. So you want to recognize that and to acknowledge that. You don't want to blur the distinctions. That's one of the ideas behind not mixing the species. Because what happens is,
you can't say
it's the same thing. It's the same, right? It's the same thing that happens. Of what?
You have to separate the animals during.
I never heard of such a halacha. No,
to do that.
But the thing is, when you do any activity where human purpose overrides, it's the same thing as you could see it in even among human beings. Where people become numbers. People become a number. You don't look at the person anymore. You just become, let's say, a factory. You don't look at a person as a person anymore. They're just machines. They're just tools. So it's the same thing here. If you reduce the animals, they're just tools. You forget that God created sheep and He created camels. And true, for your purpose, it might not make a difference right now. But you have to remember there's a bigger purpose than yours. Mm-hmm. That's the idea. So, now moving further. So, now we get to another halacha here. When you hold the leash, and this applies, by the way, if you're walking a dog as well, if there's no eruv, or any animal, that when you hold the leash, you shouldn't allow the leash end to protrude from your hand more than a tefach. So you might say to yourself, a tefach is this much. So you say to yourself, wait a second, how can you be carrying a leash outside on Shabbat anyway if there's no eruv? The answer is that you're not considered to be carrying it. The dog is considered to be carrying it. You're just leading the animal. You're not considered to be carrying it yourself. So you don't need an eruv, actually, to be able to carry the animal on Shabbat. I'm sorry, to lead the animal on Shabbat and take it for a walk. You're allowed to hold that leash.
But you can't carry it.
You can't carry the animal.
The entire leash
Now,
productive.
if the more than a tefach is protruding, somebody's going to look from afar and say, "Oh, he's carrying a rope in his hand."
But a tefach?
A tefach is this much, 3 inches. So if a lot is protruding, somebody's going to say you have something in your hand that you're carrying. But if they just see, if there's only a tiny bit protruding, it's clear that whatever's being carried is really carried by the animal and not by you. That's what Shmuel says. But didn't they say in the Yeshiva of Shmuel Tfachayim that you have up to 6 inches that you can let protrude from your hand, that it's okay? Amar Abai says, Hashtad Amar Shmuel Tefach, V'tadvei Shmuel Tefachayim. Since Shmuel himself said 1 tefach, and his Yeshiva said double that, what do we say? That even though true, it's technically correct that you have up to 2 tefachim, you have up to 6 inches, Shmuel is telling you, don't go beyond 3. To be careful. Play it safe. Now we come to Amud Bet. But we said in the Braita, it also said that if you're holding a leash, leading an animal, it has to be at least a tefach above the ground. Okay? But doesn't that imply it can be hanging all the way out of your hand? Just as long as it's not within 3 inches of the ground? So that implies that you can have as much protruding as you want. No, because there's 2 things. One is how much is protruding from your hand. The other one is how tense the leash itself is. So imagine you're walking with the dog, and the leash is dragging on the ground. So now it looks as if really you're just carrying a leash, dragging it along the ground. Whereas if you're holding it in the air and it's above the ground, it's clear that what's happening is you're holding it and you're leading the dog. The dog is the one who is carrying the leash, and it's not dragging along the ground. Now the new Mishnah says, "Ein chamor yotzeh b'mar da'at b'zman she'ena kishura lo." We learned about this yesterday, that the chamor, the donkey, cannot go out with a saddle cloth. And remember, they would wear the saddle cloth separately from the saddle itself, as long as it's attached. But if it's not attached, if it's not tied, he can't do that. And they can't go out into the public domain wearing a bell. Because what does a bell mean? We're going to the marketplace. Even if you plug up the bell, still it looks like it's decorated to go to the marketplace. You can't do it. You can't go out with the ladder on its neck. We're going to see what that is. And you can't go out with a strap on its leg. We're going to see what all these things are. And the chicks can't go out. We're not talking about the chicks that Frederick is interested in. We're talking about the chicks, the chickens, little baby chickens.
He loves baby.
I know. You like baby chickens too? Okay. So with the string on their leg or with the strap on their leg, they can't go out with it. We're going to see what the function of this was. And the male rams can't go out with an agala. They used to put a little wagon that the animals would drag behind them, that their tail would rest on, because the tails would be so long that they would be hurt by the ground. They would bump against rocks and things like that. Sheep can't go out chanunot, which we're going to see what that is. And the calf cannot go out with the gimon. The gimon, we're going to learn, is a practice yoke. To train the young oxen to carry a yoke, they would put a practice yoke to train its neck. And the cow cannot go out with the skin of, what is a kupar? What animal is a kupar? Is it translated as?
Kupar is a hedgehog.
Hedgehog, okay, all right. Sure. So a hedgehog, okay. And we're going to see that the reason why they put that was because it would ward off different kind of bugs that would bite the animals. And they couldn't go out with a strap between the horns of the animal, which was usually a decorative strap. And although the majority of the rabbis opposed this idea of an animal going out with a strap between its horns as a decoration, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's personal cow went out with just that kind of a decoration against the will of the Chachamim. We're going to see more about that story further on. The Gemara says, what's the reason why the donkey cannot go out with a loose saddle cloth, even though it's warm for it? Kid Amaran, we already learned in the previous discussion yesterday, the reason is because it might fall off. So it has to be firmly affixed, and it has to be affixed before Shabbat. Because by putting it on before Shabbat, you show that the animal needs it for warmth. It's really to benefit the animal. What's the reason why you can't go out with a bell? Because it looks like you're going to the market. What does it mean? A saddle on its neck. I'm sorry, not a saddle, a ladder on its neck. What does it mean? Belo'ah. It's something that would go over the face of the animal, the cheeks. This is something we still use with dogs. You know how they put that whatchamacallit thing? The cone, right? So this is what they would have. So if the dog had like a wound and they don't want it to lick the wound or bite it, like if the dog has a surgery, so they will put that cone on its head so it can't turn its head and lick the wound. I know because my parents' dog broke its leg a couple of years ago really badly and had to have it. Yeah, so they put that cone so that it can't turn. And Rami's dog had it too because it had a similar thing. It broke the back of its leg, so they won't bite or lick the wound and ruin the dressing of the wound. So they did the same thing. It was called they had a ladder, kind of. It looked like a ladder. It would fit over their head, and they couldn't turn to disturb the wound that they would have. So it's not allowed to go out with that on Shabbat because it's not considered an ornament and it's not considered clothing. They have to stay inside if they're going to be wearing that. It would be considered carrying for the animal to be carrying a burden outside. The animal cannot go out with a strap on its leg.
So in that condition, you don't have a problem of entrapment.
No, it's allowed to stay inside. It's not trapping. It lives there.
But if
it lives inside.
If the animal wants to go out.
Keeping the door closed is not trapping the animal. It's allowed to stay inside. You don't have to leave your door open. If you have a dog, do you have to leave the door open all Shabbat?
No, if it's an outdoor animal.
Well, it has a barn. It lives in a field. It has a fence.
And
it's not trapping. It lives there. So the Avdei Gizra, what does this mean? That if the animal's walking in a funny way, that its legs are bumping and chafing each other, so they would put a strap around to prevent the chafing of the legs against one another. What does it mean that the chickens cannot go out with chutin, with the strings on their feet? Because the purpose of these strings was like a dog tag. It was to identify the animal. It wasn't an adornment. It wasn't any kind of a clothing. The whole purpose was basically commercial purpose. It's mine, right? Everybody would have their own tag, so it serves the owners, not the animal, and therefore it's a burden as far as the animal is concerned, and you're not letting your animal rest on Shabbat. You're making it carry your tag. That's not nice. And it can't go out with the ritzu'ah that they would tie to their leg. Because what was the reason why they would tie a strap to the leg of the chicken? To discourage it from jumping around. Because they would jump, the little chicks, they wouldn't fly away, but they would jump around and break stuff. It was very common for them to break stuff, and they didn't want them to break stuff. So what's the reason why you're doing it? Is it for the animal's benefit? No, the animal wants to break stuff. It's for your benefit. So because you're doing that for your own benefit, it's not an adornment to the animal. It's not a clothing. So you're really making it carry something for you on Shabbat. So the males cannot go out with an agala, carrying a wagon behind them, so that it would not damage. The reason for it was that it wouldn't damage its tail. In other words, the tail would drag along the ground. They wanted the tail to be nice and beautiful, so they would put this. It would carry a little wagon behind it that would carry the tail, and that way the tail wouldn't get damaged. That was not considered an adornment, and it's not clothing because it's dragging a wagon behind it, so it's not allowed to go out like that on Shabbat. Now we have to understand, what does it mean? Sheep cannot be chanunot. What does chanunot mean? Yativ Rav Achabar Ula kamed Rav Chizda. Rav Achabar Ula was sitting in front of Rav Chizda. Yativ Kamar, and he said as follows: Misha'a shegozezinota tomnin la azak b'shemet, u'manechin la al pedachta kedei shelo titztanen. He said, when an animal is born and when it's young, okay, and they shave it. I'm sorry, I didn't say when it was born. When an animal is being sheared, okay? When it's being sheared and it's going to be cold, so what would they do? They would take this. They would dip this. What is the azak? What is it? How does it translate to azak?
Azak.
It says okay. It says actually it's cotton. Okay, some kind of cloth. Yeah, some kind of cloth. Okay, it could be any kind of cloth. I thought it was something specific. Rashi says it's not something specific. It could be any kind of cloth, any kind of item, cotton or otherwise. So they would put it in oil, and they would put it on its forehead so that it wouldn't get chilled. In other words, this was some kind of medicinal thing to keep it warm when it had just gotten sheared. So Amar li Rav Chizda said, wait a second. Im ken asita mar ukva. Are you making your sheep into mar ukva? Right? Sember Geffen is cotton. Right, so he says to him, "Are you?" In other words, Mar Ukva was like the head of the academy at that time. He's saying to him, "You're treating your, it's like Paris Hilton, with these dogs with the travel in a little bag, and then, you're treating your sheep like it's getting the VIP treatment. It's because you sheared the sheep, so you put a special cloth on it to keep it warm. I mean, why is it getting the VIP? It's like when they send their dog to a spa now."
Right. My business.
Yeah. So that's what they do. So Ella Yativ Rav Papa Bar Shmuel Kamed Rav Chisda. So then Rav Papa Bar Shmuel was in front of Rav Chisda. Yativ Kamarni said a different explanation. He said, what Chanunot is? Why are they calling it Chanunot? Because Chanina means to be gracious to the animal. Something nice. So they're talking about the finest treatment here. So he says, no. Actually, it's that B'shah shekorad leled, when the sheep goes to give birth. So and they bring 2 cloths with oil-soaked cloths. They put one on the forehead, and one on the stomach, so that it will warm up from this warm. I guess the oil maybe was warm.
It's like lanolin.
It would give it a warm feeling. It would give a good feeling. Yeah. So it would during the birth process, they would give it to the animal to warm it. So Amar le Rav Nachman said, "Imken asita Yalta." So you're making it. That's his wife's name, by the way. He says, "Oh, so you're making the sheep like Yalta, like my wife." Because now look at what kind of treatment this sheep is giving birth, and you're giving it, massage and oils, and it has its own doula. What's going on here? Ela Amar Rav Huna says, actually, there is a certain tree by the sea, and it's called Hanun. That they would put it in the nose of the sheep, and it would cause it to sneeze, and this would loosen certain kinds of like worms or things that it had in its head, from sneezing. So it would induce sneezing. That's true, Zecharim Nami. So why was this only for Rechelim? In other words, up till now we've been trying to explain why it would be for sheep. But if that's true, why is it not also for rams? Why only for the females? Why is it not also for males? So the answer is because since the males are butting heads against each other all the time, they don't need anything to make them sneeze. Only the girls need it.
Dislodges the worm.
Right. So Shimon Nezira said, Kisma de Ritma. They actually used something from rotem wood, not from a wood called chanun, from rotem wood. So, now we understand why these sheep are called chanunot, because they're going out with this chip in their nose that is to make them sneeze, and it's from a tree called chanun. But according to the rabbis, why is it called chanunot? Since they're telling us that chanunot means that that it's one of these other kinds of treatments that doesn't have anything to do with a tree called chanun. So the answer is the avdina lahu miltad merachaminan alayhu, because all of these things, whether it be inducing sneezing, whether it be putting the oil compress, whatever it is, it's a kind action. Chanunot means spoiling them, treating them with extra good treatment. So the idea of chanunot is, since whatever this is, whether it be the oil compress or whether it be the stick in the nose that's to induce sneezing to get the congestion out or to get the worms out, whatever. So whatever this is an extra VIP treatment, and that's why it's called chanunot. And they cannot go out with this stuff on them on Shabbat.
It's funny in Moroccan.
Yeah, compassion.
In Moroccan Arabic, the mucus from the nose is called chnuna.
Oh, there you go. Nothing from here.
It's called chnuna.
There you go. That's interesting. So it says that the cow cannot go out with the gimon. So we said a gimon is a practice yoke. So my egel bagimon, what does it mean? Amar Rafuna bar Nira, Amar Rabbi Elazar, my mashma. I'm sorry, my egel bagimon. Amar Rafuna bar Nira, Amar Elazar, my mashma. What does it mean? Tai gimon lishnat de mekaf. How do we know that this is talking about Mekaf, it's talking about some kind of a bending of the neck. Tichtiv halachof ke'agmon rosho. Because it says, so, I'm sorry, I read it wrong. Because it's my egel begimon. Amar Rav Huna, bar nira. It's a bar nira. Bar nira is what it's called. The small yoke that they would put on them is called bar nira. So how do we know that gimon is the language of a small yoke, or a mini yoke, a training yoke? Because because when it talks in Yeshayahu about fasting, it says, is fasting to bend your neck like a bulrush, right? And it says, halachof ke'agmon rosho. Should you bend your neck ke'agmon? So the word gimon means something that, that bends its neck. And here it means the mini yoke. Velo parab ora kupar. So it says that the cow cannot go out with the hedgehog skin. The avdela that they put on it, that they put on it so that these different kinds of leeches would not suck its blood. So they put this cover over it. The cow cannot go out with a strap between its horns. There's two different opinions. According to Rav, it doesn't matter why you put the strap. Hold on just one second. Definitely tissues here. It doesn't, yeah, exactly. I'm having some sympathy here with them. So if it's, according to Rav, whether it's for beautification or to protect the animal in some way, then it's still not allowed because it's considered superfluous. You don't really need this extra strap between the horns of the animal. According to Shmuel, if it were for beautification, it wouldn't be allowed because it's not considered something that has sufficient justification to be worn on Shabbat. But if it is to guard the animal in some way, to protect the animal in some way, then it would be allowed. But anyway, the halacha is that you can't put a strap between its horns anyway. So paratosh Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's cow would go out wearing a strap between its horns. Did he have only one cow? You're saying the cow of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rav said, and some say Rav Yehuda reported in the name of Rav Teresar Alfe Egle Hava Maaser Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Be'edrei Kol Shatav Shatav. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was so rich that he would give as Maaser 12,000 cows a year. That meant he had 120,000 new cows a year. Not bad. So he didn't have one, that's for sure. So how could you say his cow, acting like he has only one cow? This is not like Mary had a little lamb here. We're talking about major cows. So, Tana, it says in the Tosefta, Lo shelo hayta. It wasn't his. Ela shel shechkenato hayta. He had a neighbor who had a cow.
He had 120,000.
His neighbor had one, yeah. Omitoch shelo michaba. And this lady would go and allow her cow to go out with a strap between its horns on Shabbat. And since he never said anything to her, nikret al shemo. It's called his cow because he allowed her to do it. Rav, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Chaviva. Rav, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, and Rav Chaviva. Now the Gemara interrupts and says, Matnu b'kulei de seder moed. Whenever we see these names in seder moed, kol ki hai zuga, chalufe Rabbi Yochanan, u'ma'ayel Rabbi Yonatan. It shouldn't be, whenever you see this list of names in seder moed, which is what we're in, you should take out Rabbi Yochanan and put Rabbi Yonatan. So really it should be Rav, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yonatan, and Rav Chaviva said the following statements. Kol mi she'efshar lemachot lanshe beto v'lo micha nitpas al anshe beto. Anybody who has the opportunity to protest against the bad behavior of his family and he doesn't do so, he is held responsible for their actions. Alanshe beto. He's held responsible for their actions. Alanshe iro, if he has a chance to protest against the actions of his city, the people of his city, nitpas alanshe iro. He's held responsible for the actions of the people of his city. B'chol ha'olam kulo. If he has so much power that he can have influence over the entire world, and he could stop them from doing bad, and he doesn't do it, nitpas al kol ha'olam kulo, then he is held responsible for the whole world. Amar Rav Papa said, That means that those in the house of the exilarch, those who are in charge of the entire community and have influence over the entire world, the entire Jewish world at least, are held responsible for the entire Jewish world because they have the clout to set policy for them. So they have responsibility for them. Jihad Amar Rabbi Chanina, like what Rabbi Chanina said, "My dichtiv Hashem b'mishpat yavom ziknei amo v'sarav." As it says, Hashem is going to come to judgment with the elders of His people and its princes. Im sarim chatu. True, the political leaders have sinned. Zikenim chatu. But what have the elders done? The elders are the pious people. Ela ema al zikenim shelo michu basarim. Rather, what it means is that God is going to come to judgment not only with the princes, but also with the elders. Because even though the elders are pious and they're righteous and they're scholarly, since they didn't say anything to the princes, they didn't intervene when they could have intervened, but they sat back in silence. As it says, the only thing that's what's the famous saying, right? All that's necessary for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. Okay, so there you go. It's exactly what the Gemara is saying. If you sit back and do nothing, you're just as culpable in the evil that's perpetrated if you had the opportunity to intervene. And now we have the great blessing over the next 2 days of having 2 dapim of Agadata, of Agadot, of stories and Midrash, and a beautiful, it's going to be beautiful philosophical and ethical discussions and stories over the next 2 days to give us a respite from all the technical Talmud that we've done for the past several days for the next 2. Have a great day.